Walking along a path on the roots of Pikes Peak, you think back to earlier times in your life and how much simpler they were, so much more real, authentic. Shaking those thoughts away, you take a fork in the road over to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and how many genres are there in the publishing world exactly? Over at a corner table by the fire are three people. One of them has to go home because, well, I don't want to blame the person suffering the headache, but you'll see what I mean soon. The other person is me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to one very simple goal, a renaissance of the Christian imagination. To further this goal, we do all sorts of things. Each spring, COVID permitting, you know this by now, we have our big Imagination Redeemed conference, which attracts folks from all across the country. We have a regular slate of concerts, lectures, and other events designed to foster love and understanding of arts and faith. And we have our own Guild of Artists right here in Colorado Springs. That's right, guilds are cool. You should start one. And when this guild isn't creating art, some of us like to podcast. Therefore, we have Believe to See. To find out more about the Anselm Society, visit us at anselmsociety.org. And while you're there, come on, check out our other two podcasts, Redeemed Imagination, Speaking with Joy. They're both great. And why don't you write a review? It's really not that hard. I think I've been telling you guys, I'm a reviewer now. It's kind of fun. You know, get to sign those little stars. Go ahead and just slap 5 stars on and send us a review. We really appreciate it. Helps increase the visibility of the show. And today, well, this is a topic I am super excited about. I've been wanting to do this topic for a long time. And our scheduled co-host, Mandy, was very excited about this too. But you may recall from my intro, she had to leave the pub table. And that is because she had a migraine headache, which I totally get. I get migraines all the time too. She offered to soldier on through it, but I think we decided to go the humane route. But she did say that she was going to close her eyes and stop thinking about politics so much. And Mandy, maybe you just need to stop posting about the politics. Just saying. I enjoy the stuff you post about politics. I think it's thoughtful. But if you're having trouble with migraines, hashtag just saying. I don't know. But so it'll just be me and our guest and more questions for me. That works out perfectly on my end. But our guest is someone, like I mentioned, I've wanted to have on the show for a while. And to set this up, I want to take you back in time all the way to, oh my gosh, 2008? Yeah, 2008. Okay, so scene opens on a young Matthew Mellema. His hair is blonde and still kind of bleached. He's in actually reasonably good shape and has tan skin. He's an English major and has no clue what he wants to do in his life. So, luckily, there's a couple at the church. The husband is an attorney with Air Force JAG, and he offers to take me along and tag along for a case. I see through it with the trial. It's super cool. I'm like, hey, maybe this attorney stuff is something else. But that attorney is not who the guest is. The guest is that attorney's wife, Elizabeth Byler Younts, and she went to my parents' church back in the day. And when I knew her, she was working on some very early book projects, talking to my mom about it. And my mom thought all her writing was super, super good and wanted her to get it published right away. And lo and behold, she gets published. She now has several books out. They've been very well received. And hey, it happened. It worked. It does work sometimes, people. But she also has a very interesting perspective on something that I will get into very quickly. But Elizabeth, welcome to the table.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It is so nice to be here. And I did want to give a shout out to poor Mandy. I really, that is rough with migraines. I had actually a pretty bad headache earlier today too. I was able to get rid of it. So I'm so glad because I wanted to be able to give you my full attention. So I'm so sorry, Mandy, not to have been able to meet you here, but maybe another time.
Yeah, hopefully as we speak, she is laying in a nice dark room and not thinking about politics. But
we should all not be thinking about politics.
Exactly. So first of all, I do want to make it very clear that my mother may literally be your biggest fan, and she was thrilled when I asked her if she could connect us, over email to be on the show, and she kept being like, "Hey, Matt, you need to read this book. Have you read it yet? Okay, well, I'll describe the entire plot to you. Let me just describe the plot. So,
So you won't
do
have
you
to read
remember
it.
those conversations with my mom back at church when you were just getting started out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we would definitely talk books, and she just is such an enthusiastic person and mom and reader. And I just loved her. And I loved the way that she was so excited about what you boys were doing. And I don't remember which of you this was, but I feel like, I hope I have this right. I feel like she maybe emailed me an essay that one of you boys did about the virtues found in Harry Potter. Could that have been?
Oh,
Maybe. I don't know if it was you.
That was probably me. It sounds like the sort of thing I would write. So that's very on brand.
And I thought it was fascinating. I remember reading it actually, but I don't remember anything except for the fact that I read it and I thought it was good. But yeah, I mean, we had great conversations with your parents. And the funny thing is, I mean, we were just getting started in our lives as parents. So we had very little, to be related to in the context of parenting. So we talked about all the other things, which is really fun. So, but yeah, it's just great to stay connected in some way. I mean, there's a lot about social media that I don't like, but there's a lot about it that I do. And those are the things that are the fun parts. Is we've lived all over the country because of the Air Force, and, maintaining some connections has been just a blessing to us. And I really enjoyed your parents.
Good. And I totally second you on that aspect of social media. Just being able to keep tabs on all these people who, maybe you moved away from or you went to school with. I absolutely agree on that part. And so there are a lot of reasons I thought it'd be great to have you on the show. But one of the primary ones is you have this really interesting connection to the Amish literary genre, or Amish books. And
yes.
So let me also take the readers back in time. I'll take them back in time a couple years before that. Let's say 2004. 16-year-old Matt is, idly wandering through his parents' living room, sees an Amish book. It has a name like The Shunning or The Oath, something like that. I pick it up and look at the cover. My mom walks through the door, say, "Oh, Matt, are you interested in that book?" And I say something like, just looking at the cover, but And then my mom proceeds to give me a 15-minute blow-by-blow account of every single thing that happens in the Amish genre. My mom, as Elizabeth, you know very well, is an Amish nut, and she reads so many books on the Amish. And I'm just sort of watching from afar, is just thinking, why? What is going on with these Amish books? Because it is definitely its own genre now, and it has a lot of different conventions, a lot of subgenres within the genre. And a lot of us who, aren't the core demographic for that may be wondering what's going on. And you write sort of like you can explain it better than I can, but you sort of had one foot in the Amish realm, one foot more in the standard general literature. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and the kind of stuff that you write?
Well, so my background, if I go a little further back, is that I was actually born into an Amish family. My parents were originally from the States and moved to Canada during Vietnam and met there. They were just 3, 4, 5 years old or so. And they were, big families in the Amish church. Both of them come from families of 9. My grandpa, my dad's side, was an Amish preacher at the time. And so they met, fell in love, and when they were expecting me, they had my sister in Canada. When they were expecting me, they moved back down to the States and they settled in Michigan. A lot of people, assume the Amish are really, Ohio, Pennsylvania. There's quite a bit in Michigan because I think in large part because so many of them fled to Canada during the Vietnam War. And my dad was originally from Delaware. And so a lot of his family returned there. And then my mom's family, they kind of spread out not very spread out, but Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania on some level, but they didn't stay in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm at now. And then, so it was just my sister and myself and my younger brother when we were just really quite young still. I think I might have been just ready to enter kindergarten, maybe. They really felt the calling to leave the church. There are a lot of reasons why people leave the Amish church. Their sustainability for families is actually quite high. And they didn't leave as young people in the sense of during what I think a lot of people understand as the Rumspringa years, which is also probably an entirely different subject matter in a podcast, but they didn't leave during that time, but they were in their young 20s, very young family, living across the street from my grandparents, my mom's side. And they decide that they just really feel strongly that God is calling them to leave the church for very specific reasons, very much regarding the witness that they had received from another preacher that was not of the Amish faith, that they had never heard before, specific to salvation and repentance and an assurance of those things. And they just never heard of that before. So they left. My dad was still on an Amish working crew. He was a carpenter, and he still is. So we were raised very tight knit with our Amish family. My parents were shunned. However, a lot of the books in the Amish genre, you'll see things about, like, when you said the shunning, like, I'm pretty sure that I can think of the author that wrote that. So, or one of them anyway. There's probably more than one. But, in a shunning, it can be super dramatic. And it also can look like what it was generally for our family, which was that, our relationship looked different. There are rules that we have to abide by. But the kids of a family are not shunned because it wasn't our choice to leave the church, and we were not baptized within the church. So my sister, my brother, and I are not shunned. We still had continued to maintain a great relationship with all of our family. My parents had to work really hard and give a lot of grace to be able to do that. And I don't know that I don't think I'll ever fully understand what it meant for them to walk away from their families, knowing that relationship might be severed in a way that was maybe on that more dramatic side, like you do see sometimes. But their hearts were that they were leaving for a deeper relationship with God, and that with that in mind, that there would be a blessing with that. And there was, because their relationship with their parents over time and over, the choosing of forgiveness with all of them, they built a new relationship with one another, and one that was really founded on respect and a decision to continue that relationship instead of just letting it fall away, like it really does happen with a lot of people who leave the church. But because of that, my sister, brother, and I, we were, raised in a public school with a very small farming community where we were always known as the Amish kids, even though we weren't Amish anymore, which was kind of funny because I think people often think that it's a nationality. Mm-hmm. So they'll all the way even through almost up through my graduation, they would say, well, now you're Amish though, right? And I'm like, well, do I look Amish? And no, it's a religion. It's a culture. It's a lifestyle. Yeah. It's not, my blood. So, we kind of had our lives were in this modern for the 80s world. Mm-hmm. And yet we were being raised alongside our Amish cousins. We spoke that language first. All of us spoke the language first. We still speak the language together. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know anything else than living on kind of both sides of the church. But we knew we were different, and that we had a lot of Amish cousins. We also had a lot of family that ended up leaving the church. So most of my cousins on my mom's side are not Amish anymore, and most on my dad's side are still Amish. But it was a wonderful way to be raised, and we didn't know it was any different, than that. We had amazing grandparents who loved us, and they might not have been able to do what other grandparents were able to do for their kids and their grandkids, because I have over 100 first cousins. So, if you split that even remotely in half, imagine how many Christmas gifts that might be for one grandparent to provide, So it looked a lot different than my friends, but we loved it. And I did read some Amish fiction when I was young. I remember distinctly getting one, I think it was called Ellie, when I was probably middle school or so. And I thought it was fun. And in college, I may have read a few. And at that point, it probably would have been more along the line of feeling a little lonely for my home and wanting a little connection. But what I kept finding was that it didn't feel as authentic as I knew that I had grown up in. And this isn't to be a discredit to those people who are writing, because they're doing their interviews, they are doing their research, and it isn't that it's even wrong. Many districts act differently than the district that can be, down the road from them. The way that the guidelines of the church are just, as such that districts can create their own set of guidelines and rules and standards. So some things will look very different, but it just didn't feel quite as real. And I thought, I lived this. I don't need to read this. So I didn't read any Amish fiction for many, many years until I was probably would have been in my 30s when, late 20s and early 30s, when I started really pursuing publication. So that would have been about the time that I would have met your parents. And I was really wanting to get deeper into what professional writing. And I'd always, since day one, I'd wanted to be an author. Before I could read, I used to pretend to write. And I started writing when I was 11. I promised my Amish grandma, her name was Lydia, and it was my mom's mom. I promised her that someday I would write her memoir and her story. Her grandmother had a story written about her from one of my grandmother's cousins. And I thought that was fascinating. That was the first time I'd read a book that was about someone who was just ordinary. It wasn't some fantastical person. It wasn't, a president or someone who was, in a concentration camp or, it wasn't that kind of a story. It was just this simple story of this Amish girl growing up. And I thought, oh, I can do that. And little did I know that when I'm 31 and I'm so afraid that my grandma's going to pass away before I get a chance to do this. And so I really, especially actually when I lived in Colorado, I started really digging into starting the process of writing that. And it felt very different because I tended to write fiction and never had written any Amish fiction. Wasn't published yet, but I couldn't make it up. I had to follow the story. I had to follow her real life. So I had started in Colorado Springs, and then we moved to San Antonio. It was just an amazing chance there where I was able to sit in a writing critique group that met weekly, and we had the blessing of having a published author that was part of the group. She was one of the founding members. Her name is Allison Pittman, and I don't know how familiar you are with her writing. She's a fantastic writer, and her latest one is especially beautiful, called The Seamstress. So I was able to learn under her, and through this group, really dig deeper into getting this memoir written. And that really was what opened the door. I never saw myself writing Amish fiction. I definitely said I will never write Amish fiction because I thought I lived it. I don't need to write it, and I saw all these, you go to Walmart and you see the loads of covers and I just saw these women in blue that were looking out into the sunset I'm not saying that's not real. I mean, people do that. Sure. You have that, far off gaze and you're thinking about things, whatever. That's great. But that's just not what it's like a busy life. It's like there's still grit under the fingernails and you're still, dealing with rebellious children and you're having to go through all the regular life things. It's not just about a pretty girl in blue. And so it just hadn't pulled me in. But once I got, so the book that I wrote for my grandma, it was called Seasons, a real story of an Amish girl. This was going to be a family book, something that I was just I wanted it to be good in the sense of that it was well edited and professionally taken care of. And I wanted that, but I also wanted it to fulfill a promise and then move on and write my fiction. But as I, continued to write this, there was something that needled inside of me that thought about how, the history of the Amish during the same era that my grandmother was growing up in is an untold story. And as I, published this book, I went through CreateSpace, just independently published it. And I can truly say that, there are very few shocks that you get in your life that are good. We have a lot of bad ones. You don't often get a lot of good ones. And that was a beautiful one because it became one of those books that it just sold a lot. And I didn't expect that. I was thinking I might sell a few hundred to my family. And that's just not what God had in mind for it. And I recognized that there was something important in what that era was providing a reader that we hadn't really seen before, which was, the Amish historical type of story. where the plot really does talk about their pacifism, their choice to be conscientious objectors, and what does that look like? And here I'm a military wife, very supportive of my husband and his life and his career choice, but yet I come from a very pacifist background, and I understand their viewpoints pretty well. And I would say that I agree with some of them easily on that level. So that's kind of how it kind of pushed me into the Amish world again. And I checked with a couple of agents. There was one agent that was very interested, another agent that she thought it was really interesting that kind of a book sold that much. And she just had even a deeper interest in it. And so, they said, well, once you have something written, send it to me. So I thought, okay, well, I can whip this thing out. I can have it out done in a couple of months. Well, it was like a year later, by the skin of my teeth. I sent them emails and sent them a completed manuscript. While I wrote it, my husband was deployed, and I had I had a preschooler and a toddler, and it was, probably good timing to write a book about World War II, Amish couple where the boy, he chooses to defy his pacifist beliefs and go to war instead of going to the civilian public service camps where the Amish were given an opportunity to serve instead of going to war. So that's where the first story came from, was born out of my grandmother's writing my grandmother's story, in part. And my grandpa, her husband, so that side of the family still, he was also drafted during World War II. And a lot of people don't know what happens to an Amish person when they get drafted. And these are stories that I heard growing up all the time, but it was a story that I recognized that no one else really knew. And that there was something called a civilian public service camp, and it was somewhat demeaning in many ways. And they didn't get paid even as much as a German POW. There were things in our history that most people just have never heard of before. So I thought, well, I can at least talk about that. I can at least write about that. And so when I sent it, I had one of the agents that I had met a year earlier was very interested in it. And it seemed like a whirlwind, but by the time we signed for her to represent me, I think I had a contract in less than 30 days. Again, it shocked me because, again, I'm thinking, this is Amish fiction, something that I really didn't read much of. I have friends who write it, and so I would read theirs, knowing that there could be some grittier content because that's the kind of reader that I am. And just didn't know what to expect. But that was another, I guess, good shock. So that's how it kind of started. I started writing with Howard Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. It was a good experience, and it, really kind of showed me the ropes of what it looks like to work professionally with a house. And I remember my first conversation with my editor, and it was so uncomfortable because I didn't even know the questions to ask. That's how green I was. I didn't even know what half the stuff she was talking about, what she meant by it, like all these different types of edits. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to realize tomorrow that I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh man, this is sounding like quintessential imposter syndrome right there.
Oh my goodness, it really is. And you think, well, what if only one book does well? The one hit wonder. And we went through all of those things, and so I did the 3 books with them, and I don't know if the world was ready for Amish historical fiction because I can't say zine sales, and it's hard to find a readership when I think I was number 57 out of the Amish genre, and a lot of Amish readers really prefer a sweeter read, and I'm not that writer. My stuff usually just has a little more grit behind it, I guess, or as another writer mentioned when he was looking at it for an endorsement, he said, it seems to me that you're writing out of the darkness of the Amish genre. And he didn't feel comfortable giving me an endorsement, and that was fine because his readership would not have read my books. But that's okay. So, that's kind of how it started, and I really enjoyed it. But I did tell my agent, it was just before my 3rd book came out, I'm not writing this forever. So I'm going to start looking at something else because I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that forever. And she was great with that because she likes my other ideas. And, if there are other aspiring writers out there, find an agent that is a champion of you, of who you are, and will fight for you and knows, your giftings and will keep you in those giftings. That's what I feel like I have with my agent. And we've been together now since 2012. And, she's become a friend and a confidant and just a lovely person. So I don't know if you have a larger reader listener or a writer listener who can listen to your podcast. But if there are writers out there, people ask me all the time, is it really worth it to get an agent? And I absolutely 100% get an agent. That's my point of view, but not everyone. And if you want to go traditional, that is. If you don't, then I wouldn't worry about it. But so that's kind of how I got started. Yeah. I don't know if that was like way more than you needed to know, but that is kind of the story of where it began.
No, that is all great. And again, all listeners, they're probably nodding like, oh, that's why Matt wanted her on the podcast. Yeah, because one of the things that stuck out to me when you were early on there is like, I love the dynamic of you being raised in an Amish house where your parents go through, like even all of us, outside the community know shunning, or at least something about that. So your family, your huge extended family is all Amish, but you go to a public school. Yeah. Where your public school classmates think you're Amish. It's like, guys, if she was actually Amish, she wouldn't be going to school. But anyway, whatever. So I love that you kind of grew up with this foot in both worlds. And I think that's really reflected in the sort of projects you selected. So specific question along those lines. You touched on this briefly, but when you're in this stage, I was thinking especially to like when you're in Colorado Springs, you're sort of starting to get going and you start reading through some of this Amish literature. I assume you're reading it for like market research. What are your impressions? You hinted that you had some hints that like maybe they wouldn't be as fully developed people as you saw in your experience. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what were your experiences reading this Amish literature, coming at it, 10 years removed from your Amish childhood?
Well, I'll put a caveat on some of that because for one thing, as a reader, I read things that probably will make me want to throw the book across the room, will want me to pull my hair out, will make me cry or scream or think like, well, I'm a horrible person. I really need to learn to be better. I really read, I like things that are much more like on the more literary scale or make me think and think and think and think a little bit more. So commercial fiction, I absolutely read a lot of commercial fiction, but I usually don't read romance, nor do I read sweeter stories. And a lot of people, that is like the mega sales for commercial fiction is the sweeter romantic reads because people want to escape into something different. And we aren't always living sweet romantic lives and running through fields and gazing into the sunset. So these are things that readers love because they get that chance to just rest in it. And it's that escapism. I'm not an escapism reader. So there is part of that with my reflection on the Amish genre is that's probably, I'm just not their reader. And I also think that my experience growing up in my family and my dad's family, those are like two snapshots of two districts that I grew up in that are not reflective of every other Amish district in the world, or in the country, I should say. So when someone writes the perspective that's very different than that, that might be their experience because Amish districts are quite different from one another. And they, personalities of Amish women, because Amish women are usually the forefront of the Amish genre books, the protagonist, and are going to be different. So they're as varied human personality wise as any of us. So you'll get some that, are spanking their kids in a circle. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to get them to listen. And the ones that will just, you think they must really, really know a lot of scripture to keep their self-control going. So you're going to get, both sides of the coin. So I think in my experience, so I say that just as like a disclaimer, my experience was not, and this isn't any discredit to my family because they are the most real, authentic, wonderful people that I could have grown up with, but they weren't, reprimanding with scripture. They weren't, nor were they also encouraging with scripture. What my experience is that when something is reprimanded and when something is encouraged, it's based on what the bishop said, not necessarily what the Bible said. And I would have to say when I started thinking I might read or write Amish fiction, I think I read one book. And that was because it was a friend of mine and I just knew her well enough to know I was going to enjoy her writing. And I read her book. It made me cry in the beginning, which is always a good thing, because for me, if you can pull out an emotion, it can make me laugh or make me cry. But if I'm not doing either, then it's probably not, that's not going to go well for the book. So I did read that. I feel like, and this is, different writers will do different things, but I felt like I wanted to stay away from it so that I didn't try to replicate it. I wanted my own voice. I wanted to make sure that I was just writing how I felt like it should be written and not to fit in with what readers are used to. So I really didn't read a lot of Amish genre once I knew I was going to write some of it. And again, some other writers feel very differently about that. So my experience then was just a much louder, brassier kind of personality with the Amish. I was with my mom's side a lot. We grew up very, within 30 minutes of each other. We were there sometimes weekly in the summer, during the school year, it maybe was less than weekly. But this was not a quiet, simpering group. These people loved big, loved loud. They were angry, they were loud. If they were happy, they were loud. Everything was loud. And not just because there were a lot of people, but that was just a personality. So we were raised with a lot of emotions and a lot of dynamics, a lot of that. And there are 9 in that family. And, you can get 2 people together and not everyone is always going to get along, let alone 9. So there was just a lot of, happening. And then you go to my dad's side, also 9, but they're much quieter, much more reflective upon maybe their lifestyle. When we would visit there, if we offended my mom's side, you will know it. If we offended my dad's side, you will never, ever, ever know it. They were incredibly gracious with us. And I'm sure we said things out of turn. I remember one time we were visiting for Thanksgiving and my brother, for some reason, I don't know what happened, but he didn't have a coat to wear. It was colder than we expected or something. And my mom was trying to get him to put on a coat from one of his cousins, who was Amish, obviously. And he was saying in Dutch, in Pennsylvania Dutch, that he is not going to wear an Amish coat. And he was saying this very loudly in front of everyone. And I just remember, the adults in the room laughing about it. They thought it was funny, but my parents were mortified that he was seeing things like that because they just wanted to put the coat on so he could go outside and play. But he was not about to wear an Amish coat. In his mind, that was not acceptable. So he was probably 4 or 5, maybe a little older, but, he was young. So even just with those 2 families, I had very, very diverse experiences. So for me, my point of view then, I could write from both of those points of view. But what I knew to be true is that my family, never once have I heard them spouting scripture as they're trying. You know what I mean? If they're doing it in their head, maybe they are, but I've never heard it out loud. That doesn't mean it never happened. I was a kid and kids have their own view. But I just felt like I'm going to write from what I remember and from what I grew up and from the stories that I heard instead of what everybody wants to believe about the Amish. But they are extremely human. They are not to be put on a pedestal and they don't want to be put on a pedestal. They don't, I've heard so many stories. Oh, I saw an Amish man and he wasn't nice to his horse. And I'm like, well, he's human. So yeah, maybe he wasn't nice to his horse because he was mad, or that child didn't have any shoes on and they were dirty. Okay. Who hasn't had a dirty kid with no shoes on? All of us, So let's not pretend like we should expect more of them than ourselves or more of them than any other religion. And I felt that there are times, I'm not saying that authors are perpetuating that, but I think readers want that because of the escapism. But since I've been writing and I've done some work with some TV shows with the Amish culture as a guide to help them kind of navigate through what is real, what is authentic, what is not. And through that experience, especially the one of them that was a lot, I was able to go on set and everything, which was really fun. It was I have to kind of see fiction, all fiction, whether it's TV, whether it's in print, any fiction, unless it is literally 100% true from the author or from the person's own mouth, it's all fantasy, all of it. Because we're not writing every time someone goes to the bathroom, someone says hello in the grocery store. or someone drops their phone in the toilet. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not writing from that point of view. So we're already removing a huge part of reality. And we're setting the reader into a place where none of that is actually happening. So when writers write with the Amish genre in mind, they have to deliver a fantasy to these readers because that's an escapism. That's what they want to read. They want to go away from their life into something simple. And that's what they can get. And even with the books I tend to write, which aren't necessarily that style, it's still going to be in part of fantasy because we can't replicate reality to the finest point or to the every, dotted I. And that's okay. That's part of what it delivers to the reader, because we don't really want to know every hello in the phone call and every telemarketer and every dust bunny that we have. We want to know what the plot is telling us and what's going on there. So when I keep that in mind, I just have no worries about like, okay, so maybe, the way that they did that Amish scene maybe wasn't exactly how I would have done it or viewed it, or maybe that isn't as what I think is maybe as accurate, but it is delivering a plot that a lot of readers love. And a lot of that is because it seems away from the reality that we're living. It's simple. It seems much more sweet and carefully put together. And I've met some people who, I met one girl, she's just like convinced that she turns 18, she's going to go Amish. And I've told her, like, please you have to, think this is not real, what you're reading. That's different than living it. And I think adults know that, but I think it's still an enjoyment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a long way around maybe.
It does. It absolutely does. And I just to sort of touch on a couple points you mentioned, I really appreciated your account of how your mom's side and your dad's side of your family are so different, and also the way that your parents' shunning went and how it doesn't quite meet maybe the stereotype expectations we'd have if we just based it off of literature. One of the things that just keeps coming around to me is like, people are people. People are complicated. They do things in complicated ways. And some Amish people are loud and exuberant. Some are quiet. Some people shun their children forever and always. Others, they kind of shun them, but they come back later and they're still nice to their grandkids. So people are complicated. It's hard to put them in a box. I really appreciate that. You got to this point too, because one of the follow-up questions I had for you, in one of these questions I have anytime I see one of these books in a bookshelf is, why the Amish? I'm sure you and your family have that conversation with each other all the time. It's like, why do these people keep writing about us? Because there are lots of communities that have their own sort of unusual rules and they stand out from the people around them. So I guess my question, you did touch on this a bit, but sort of two-pronged. One, why are the Amish the source of all these books? And two, how come readers, like you said, seem to want these books to be very sweet and simple and to sort of elevate these people as like the noble, simple livers?
I think that anything that is so, upstream from our lives that feels like this is just too different. This seems like a fantasy world again. I think people like to be that voyeur, and want to dig in what's really going on behind those closed doors. And I think that's also a little bit of the difference between the fact that I was behind those closed doors. So I'm writing from my memories and my thoughts, and it doesn't mean those things happened, everything I wrote, but those personalities did. Where, any other book and any book that I've written since then has been less so. I've written about being inside of an insane asylum, and I've never been inside one. So, there is an aspect for any writer that you have to imagine these pieces. I think people, I would say, especially now, they want to get away. They want something that will draw them away from the complicated life and the uncertainty. They could pick up an Amish book and they're certain to get a happy ending. They are certain to get something that feels wholesome. And it's like, that's different than what they're ever going to get as soon as they leave their house and their front door. And sometimes within your house, you're just not going to get the same thing. And even though right now we can say that, 2020, it's been a rough year for everybody, but even, 2000, the same thing, because whatever's going on that year is the big year, is a big thing, or the year before that. And people are going through their own crises. There's all sorts of normal, everyday chaos and crises that are happening outside of what is happening globally, and people want to get away from it. I think that is the number one reason why people read is escapism, and they want that beach read. And the Amish, I think it started in the 80s where I think Beverly Lewis might have been the keystone on that, where she's, I think she was the first writer for Amish. And I think she has some background in the Amish, I think somewhere in her family, or her husband does maybe, I'm not sure. But, that drawing out of something that's unknown, I think we're just all so curious. Our nature is to be curious, to what is it about that is so addictive. And the predictability, I think, is a huge draw. Again, that's not who I am as a reader. If I can predict it too much, I'm probably not going to keep reading. Or if even if you can't predict it, if it's just not, I like a lot of tension in the books that I read, and I have wondered a little bit because with the first, well, of course, the first one was a true story. So I didn't create content for that as far as my own, but then I did the 3 that were historical Amish. And from what I know, some of my cousins read it and they enjoyed it, but I never know because I'm not going to put every single Amish person in a happy light. There are going to be quote unquote villain people, and not everyone is always going to be upstanding. And I wasn't sure how they would take that. And then 2 books ago, it was my step out of the Amish genre, and it's just historical fiction, but it still surrounds an Amish community, but it is very different. It is not remotely an Amish book. And it talks a lot about grief and loss and alcoholism and shame and guilt. And it's, between an Amish family and an African-American family. I really didn't know how that would be received at all, whether it's by my Amish family, because the Amish deacon is the one who struggles with alcoholism, or, from just a more diverse readership that I was hoping to get in that. And then the book after that really didn't have anything to do with the Amish. However, I do have an Amish character that just makes a quick, brief cameo in it, just because they're traveling through Pennsylvania. My characters are, so you have to throw a little Amish in there. But it seems like a trademark now. It has to happen. It did feel organic to the story. However, it was kind of fun to just have a little touch of my history in there.
Yes, tip of the hat.
So, I think that, people do gravitate. I don't know what kind of books you like to read, but we tend to gravitate toward, even if we like grittier and darker things or more tension when we read, we are going to continue doing that. We're not going to suddenly stop doing that and, read something that it would be considered more of an escapism type of book. Sometimes, sure, but not where you just suddenly completely shift and you're not going to read that gritty stuff anymore. So I think when people start reading, those things that are sweeter in nature and they fill a space in them that maybe gives them some comfort, they're going to keep going back because I kind of wonder if it's like an endorphin thing too, that you kind of get that same feeling of connection that maybe you do with, people who love to work out or people who, love social media or people, it might be an addictive nature to that too. I would say I'm probably a little addicted to books. If you look through my house, you would think I am. So I meet a lot of people that as soon as they know that I have written anything that's Amish, assume that I've also read everything that's Amish, and I haven't, and I don't want to ever put down someone's choice of genre, whether it's a writer or a reader, because that's the beauty of reading, is that there's just everything is at our fingertips, and we just don't have to read something just because someone else likes it, nor do we have to, whatever we choose to write, that's then our calling to write. And, I think it's great that people are writing a lot of Amish fiction. I'm very surprised that we thought there was a downward trend, like 7 or 8 years ago, and it didn't.
Yeah.
There might be dips here and there. I don't know what it's like now. I can't tell you, I know exactly where that's at now, but it just hasn't made a downward trend, in the recent past, but it's amazing. I don't know more I don't know more reasons than just those kind of simple reasons. But, I think if those writers can keep doing what they do and make a lot of readers happy and make money doing it, great. I think that's great for them.
I will say, judging from my mom's Amish book accounts, the Amish genre is alive and well and going strong. And to that point, and I like the way you framed it with the sort of books you read. You know, it could, if you do it too much, it's bad. But I think in some amount, it can be a good thing too. Like the comfort books for me. It's the whodunit. Yeah. So whenever I'm feeling like stressed, I just need a good story. It's like, give me Agatha Christie, give me one of those Golden Age detective books. There we go. Now, this is interesting because where I talked about how my mom loves Amish books, she shares my love of the whodunit.
Oh, yeah.
They are now writing Amish whodunits.
Amish Mystery is a big one.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So when my mom told me about it, I was like, wow, if like scientists designed the perfect book for you in the lab, that's amazing. But I'm going to put a pitch for your book that you were talking about, the one involving the African-American family and the Amish community, the Solace of Water. And I just think I love the concept behind it. And it's one of those things where if we're talking genre, it's not an Amish book in terms of like the genre, but it involves a lot of Amish people, but it gets in a lot of themes. And I will say, going back to my mom again, she loves everything you write. So she read The Solace of Water, and she was telling me afterwards that, you know, it's not the typical thing she reads. Yeah. She usually doesn't go for like the grittier reads like you were talking about, but she read it and she was really happy that you sort of pushed her with her reading, and that she kind of wrestled with a lot of stuff because of that. So she loves that book, and I think you did a really great thing with how that turned out. Yeah, so that went fast. Running a little on time here at the table, but it did. Time flies when you're talking about Amish and literature. But where can we find you? Where can we find more of your writing?
I have my website, ElizabethBylerYounts.com, and of course I'm on Instagram and on Facebook, same handle. And I did take an extended break from social media since about June. We had just some family things, and just with the climate of social media, I just needed a break. Yeah. So I
that was probably a good idea.
So my latest book, The Bright Unknown, has finaled for a Christie, which was such a shock to me. So that kind of pulled me back into the social media world to promote a little bit for the book, and just to get back into the world of social media and connect with readers again. So I love to be on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well, on my author page there. I would say just as much as Instagram on some level, but either place is a good place to connect with me. And of course, through my website, you can email me, and Facebook, people email me that way too, through messages and stuff like that. So I'm always happy to chat with a reader, and I have a newsletter it's a very not consistent newsletter. Let's just say that, but I'm working on it. I'm working on making it more consistent. So that's where you can find me. And, it's a strange new world here. So I really enjoy reading or meeting readers, whether it's electronically or sometimes I randomly meet them at, different places, and talk about the things that really I feel like can change the world. And I think that art is part of that, and our reflection upon that, and our reflection of who our creator is because of what we create. And if that's, a way for me to connect with a reader, that brings me a lot of joy.
Love it. And once again, for our listeners here, I am sure that the vast majority of my listeners, typical Amish books aren't your usual cup of tea, but really, if you'd like good literature dealing with interesting stuff and wrestling with big ideas, check out The Solace of Water. Check out The Bright Unknown. It'll be worth your time. It's really fantastic. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
A blessing to me and a lot of fun.
Great. And, things are winding down at the Anselm Digital Pub. Fire's down to embers. The customers are trundling home. And, you polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.